Okay. ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਵਿਹੜੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਸਤਕਬਾਲ ਕਹਿੰਦਿਆਂ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਖੁਸ਼ਾਮਦੀਦ ਕਹਿੰਦਿਆਂ ਕਬੀਰ ਬੇਦੀ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਮਾਣ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰਦਾ। ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਮਾਝੇ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਜੁੜੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਉਸ ਸੋਚ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਉਸ ਤਜ਼ੱਫੁਫ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡਿਸੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਹੋ। ਮੇਰੀ ਮੁਰਾਦ ਬਾਬਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਬੇਦੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਕੁਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ। ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਖੁਸ਼ਨਸੀਬ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਬੈਠਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਹੋਣ ਦੇ ਨਾਤੇ ਮਾਝੇ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਵੇੜੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
ਬੜੀ ਮਿਹਰਬਾਨੀ।
ਅਪ੍ਰੈਲ ਦੇ ਮਹੀਨੇ 'ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਲਈ। ਉਸ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਤੇ ਕਰੋਨਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੂਰਾ ਮੁਲਕ ਜੂਝ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ, ਸੈਕੰਡ ਵੇਵ ਆਪਣੇ ਜ਼ੋਰਾਂ ਤੇ ਸੀ। ਦੂਸਰਾ, ਕਿਰਸਾਨੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਪੱਖ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੜਕਾਂ ਤੇ ਰੁਲ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ। ਸੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੋਲੀਡੈਰਿਟੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣਾ ਸੰਵੇਦਨਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੋਚ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣਾ ਪਿਆਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਦਿਲ ਦੀਆਂ ਗਹਿਰਾਈਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਨਮਾਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਦੇਰ ਆਨਲਾਈਨ ਸੈਸ਼ਨਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਰਹੇਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ। ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਚੌਗਿਰਦੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੂਰੀ ਕਾਇਨਾਤ, ਕੁੱਲ ਕਾਇਨਾਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ, ਉਹ ਪਰਵਰਦਿਗਾਰ, ਉਹ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਰੱਬ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਸਿਹਤ ਅਤਾ ਫਰਮਾਏ ਤੇ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਹਿਫਜ਼ੋ ਅਮਾਨ 'ਚ ਰੱਖੇ। ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਕਈ ਸਾਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕਲਾ, ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਦੇ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਅਹਿਮ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ ਦੇ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਹੋਣ ਦੇ ਨਾਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੂੜ੍ਹਤਾ ਹੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਮਾਣ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਗੀ ਕੇਵਲ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨੀ ਫਿਲਮ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਬਲਕਿ ਅੰਤਰਰਾਸ਼ਟਰੀ ਹਾਲੀਵੁੱਡ ਫਿਲਮ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਨਾਮ ਰੱਖਿਆ। ਔਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਲਿਟਰੇਰੀ ਪਰਸਨ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਅੰਦਰਲੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਦਰਦ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਪੀੜਾਂ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਭਾਵ, ਉਹ ਵਲਵਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਲਮਬੰਦ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਜਾਗਰ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਔਰ ਮੈਂ ਸੱਦਾ ਦਿਆਂਗਾ ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੀ ਫਾਊਂਡਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰੀਤੀ ਗਿੱਲ, ਉਹ ਆਉਣ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਚੱਲਣ। ਪ੍ਰੀਤੀ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ।
Thank you, Avinder ji. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. We left you at the end of April, on the 25th to be precise, never really imagining the magnitude of the grief and the horror that May was to bring to all of us. We took a break, just like Arvinder ji mentioned just now. We didn't do anything in May. In fact, even our session with Mr. Bedi was scheduled for May, but we shifted everything because it was such a time of grief and sorrow. So many families have suffered immense losses. They have lost dear ones. We have all lost family, friends, colleagues. And it just pains me to say how many people have gone, and so many of them so young and left us way too soon. On the Majha House Facebook page, we had asked our friends, writers, poets, performers, artists to actually share their feelings and share their thoughts with us. And they continue to do that for at least the last 2 weeks of May. Almost every day we were carrying something. And I'd like to thank all of them for sharing their thoughts with us. Today is the first Saturday of June, and Majha House is once again opening its doors, at least virtually. And we are once again bringing you books and writers, poets, performers, discussions, and debates on a host of interesting and critical issues. Our guest today is iconic actor, international star, philanthropist, Kabir Bedi, and a newly minted author whose book is completely stunning looking and a most interesting read. I have to recommend to each one of you, you should buy it. just do it right away, because it really makes a very, very interesting reading. And as you'll see in the conversation today, you might know something about the actor. There might be a lot of the gossip that you read about or heard about, but there's so much more that you did not know about. And we will see facets of that in the book. And I hope some of that will come across in the conversation we have today. Mr. Bedi, welcome, first of all. And
Thank you so much.
you've led an incredibly exciting, prolific life with so much packed in, both professionally and personally. Beginning with the AIR, the All India Radio, and then advertising to theater and film and television. You've done it all. You've also traveled from Delhi to Mumbai to Europe and especially Italy, where you had such a huge, resounding success. And then to Hollywood. And your career has spanned genres as well as continents. I wanted to start actually by asking you about the book. And because I have a publishing background, I've been an editor for many, many years. I wanted to ask you about the importance of writing an autobiography, writing a memoir. Why did you do it? And then, of course, also what intrigued me was the structure that you've chosen for the book. So shall we begin with that?
Yes. I had a story in me. I believe I've led a fairly remarkable life in terms of what I've covered, both in terms of geography and in terms of professional achievements, and in terms of triumphs and tribulations and all kinds of relationships and events in my life. I knew there was a good story in me. Sorry. I wasn't sure how to say it, and it took me a while to figure that out. Once I understood what I wanted to do and the way I wanted to say it, then it just exploded like a volcano inside me, and I wrote incessantly for many hours a day. And through the pandemic, I wrote about 7, 8, sometimes 10 hours a day, leaving everything for the evening, everything else for the evening, all the emails and messages and virtual appearances and voice recordings and everything else that people ask me to do. So this was something that was something I'd thought about for a long time, wanted to do for a long time, but the form eluded me. I'd write 50 pages and then it ended up in the dustbin, because I wasn't held by it. And I thought nobody but the most crazy fan would be interested in reading this. So thinking it through, I had an epiphany one day. This I could structure it through a series of stories, which in its totality became my life. And once that was clear, it just flowed like a river.
Yeah, because it's amazing. There's not really much repetition. So because you've actually divided up your life in little chunks with, people or with episodes, whatever you've chosen to talk about in this book. But really, it's not repetitive. And that's quite amazing, because you've managed to do that rather cleanly, I think.
Yes, because these are stories that are complete in themselves, have their own attention, have their own conflicts. They overlap in time. So different stories go back and forth in time. And so that freed me from the prison of linearity, of having to do everything sequentially. And I could cross-reference things in a different kind of way, which made it much more interesting to read, much more interesting to write, and while remaining true to the essence of each story. So it was a voyage of discovery for me, which I enjoyed greatly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite remarkable. And I've really, like I said, enjoyed reading the book tremendously. Can we just give everybody a little taste of what the book is about? And maybe you'd read a little bit to us.
Okay. So that's the book.
Yes.
And I'll read just in the beginning. There's a page and a half where I say, before I begin, I'll just read the first two paragraphs of it to give you a sense of what the book is about and how I set about writing it. These are stories I must tell. Most are told, perhaps unusually, through the prism of people and places I have known and loved. I tell them as truthfully as I can, fallible as I am, as interestingly as I can. They are emotional stories of turbulent times. Together, they are the story of my tumultuous journey as an actor. It is not easy to write of my life. I have seen great glory, and I'll tell you how I got there. I've also made mistakes, which you do well to avoid. But remembering stirs up memories I'd hoped to leave behind. Yet the pain and the joy, the agony and the ecstasy are inseparably woven in my life, so I share them with you too.
Thank you. Thank you. Because
I'll
that
leave it at
actually
that for now.
does sum up what the book does contain. And it's a very, very like the beginning sort of prelude to what's going to come in the book. What I loved about your book, apart from its honesty, its searing honesty, I would say at times, is the fact that it felt like a memory, a walk down memory lane for me. It was such a nostalgia trip. You talk about Delhi and you talk about St. Stephen's College, you talk about Cooler Talk and where you went to school, Auntie Goba, and there's Siani, there's the Vinaka Geet Mala, Date with You, all of the stuff that so many of us who
Yeah,
have listened to
I'm woven in the history of the times
yes,
with
yes,
my narrative as well.
yes.
So people get a sense of that. I'm very keen to do that also for today's generation, because a lot of things have been forgotten, and I think it's important to get a sense of what those times were like and what it felt like to be in Delhi, which was a fairly sleepy town in those days. But although the grand capital of India, with the grand monuments to the Rashtrapati Bhavan and India Gate and Parliament House, etc., but there was a kind of relaxedness to Delhi that, and of course, it becomes more rosy with memories and nostalgia. And working in All India Radio to work my way through college, which then led to my interview with the Beatles and all those things.
Yes.
So it all weaves together as a personal narrative as well as shades of the atmosphere and politics of the time.
So tell us about the Beatles. Tell us a little bit about that fantastic interview that you managed to get, and also for you, how that became a turning point, because that's in the book as well.
To put this in context, my parents were remarkable people. They were idealistic people. They'd come as students from Oxford on scholarship who came back to India and joined the freedom struggle. They were idealists. There's a separate story which I'll deal with later if you come to it. But the fact of the matter is their idealism didn't put much money in the till. So I had to work my way through college. And working in radio was one of the ways I did it. And I was also a crazy Beatles fan. So when the Beatles came into town and I heard they were in town, I thought, this is how I can get to them. I went to my bosses. I said, please let me interview the Beatles. They said, what are you talking about? The whole Delhi press corps trying to get in. Give me a tape recorder, let me try. And they did, indulgently. And I took this tape recorder and the press badge and I got in there. And then how I got to the Beatles, through recognizing a manager, pressuring him, telling him it's a government demand, etc., and what happened with the Beatles interview, all that I've explained in the book. But for me, it was transformative in a number of ways, because firstly, I was meeting the Beatles, man. These were people who were my gods, not just musically. They represented to me what the entire 60s meant to our generation. A generation of 60s were a time of social change. There were political changes, cultural changes, social changes, sexual changes. The pill had been invented. People got the freedom of sexuality. It was the age of counterculture and hippies and people demonstrating on the street for peace against Vietnam, and Timothy Leary, and the whole movement that rejected the rigidity of their parents' generation and causing a shift of consciousness in the West, reached us in the East, and the Beatles symbolized that. So it was not just being in the presence of a great musical group; they were symbols of the age, and to be in the same room with them was like Alice in Wonderland. But that interview was seminal for me because I took it back to All India Radio. Firstly, they played it with no fanfare. They had no idea what I'd given them. I could have sold it for a fortune to any network in the world.
Gosh, yeah.
They just played it saying, and now an interview with the Beatles. Then, to my horror, when I went to get a copy of the interview, they said, "Nahi ji, humne to tape kar diya uske upar."
Oh, God.
They taped over the interview of the Beatles because they had no money for tapes. And they just reused the tapes and didn't think any more of it. And that caused such a disillusionment inside me, such angst inside me that I said, I don't want to work with such people. Not that it was much of a living anyway, but I thought I'd be maybe a presenter or a newscaster, wherever television then those days would take me. But I don't want to work with this culture anymore because all your good ideas are shot down. Anyway, so that caused me to leave Delhi and go to Bombay with the aspiration of becoming a director, which then led to my career in advertising and theatre and Bollywood and all that followed. But that interview with the Beatles was a turning point in my life. It caused a crisis and made me realize in retrospect that crises are points of power.
Mm.
And if you, even in the depths of despair, think of them as giving you new crossroads to choose from, new directions to choose from, it becomes not a moment of despair, but your point of power. You are free to redecide your future. You close doors behind you, others open in front of you. You leave one road, there are other roads to follow. But that crisis gives you the impetus to make that change.
Exactly, because I think that's the line that also comes in your book about when you shut one door behind you, other doors appear. So obviously, to move on and to constantly find new paths, to reinvent, to recognize that you have an opportunity to do something different, I think that's always been a part of. That's characterized the path that you've taken in your own life. And another of the striking things in the book, and you've already brought that up already, is about your parents, because it was a very unusual growing up with both your parents being strong individuals, passionate about many causes together and many causes separate from one another. And yet they never really lost that companionship. They didn't lose that close bonding that they, the commitment that they had to each other. Tell us a little bit about them, because it's a very unusual way to grow up.
See, they were idealists by nature, by their sense of wanting to oppose colonialism, oppose oppression, seek out the upliftment of the downtrodden. And that's what actually united them when they were in Oxford, both there on scholarship. My mother was English, my father was Indian, yet they were united by this idealism, to the extent that when my father proposed to her and said, I can't promise you any security, I'm going back to fight for the independence of my country, she said, we'll face that together. Yes, I'll come with you, I'll marry you, and came back to India to fight the British. Now, my father was this fiery communist that orations and strikes and railway strikes and etc. My mother was much more peaceful by nature. So she chose the Gandhian path. In fact, she led a demonstration of Satyagraha in our hometown of Dera Baba Nanak, just north of Amritsar, where she was then arrested by the British And the Tribune made a big story of this, or what she did, because this was very strange for an English woman to be fighting the British. And then she was given exemplary punishment for it and jailed. So those were the times that they came out with. My father, being perhaps an over idealistic communist, renounced his share of whatever little feudal wealth his family had. They were living in Lahore, which is the capital of undivided Punjab, in these huts. No electricity, no running water, 3 sheds and a buffalo for milk. And this is where the Adda, where all these leftist freedom fighters like Gyani Zail Singh and Inder Gujral, who became prime minister later, and Sheikh Abdullah, Hafiz Jalandhari, who became the poet laureate of Pakistan, Satish Gujral, various creative people would gather and they'd be harassed by the police. But they lived these lives of extreme simplicity because they believed in a cause. And that idealism continued. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of everything. Actually, what's interesting is I've written an article for the Tribune, which will come out tomorrow, on my Punjabi Roots, where I've actually narrated some of these stories. And the fact is that even after they left politics, and a whole phase in Kashmir where my mother was involved in refugees, and both went from revolution to religion, again, their paths diverged. My father became this New Age philosopher in Italy, though he had great reverence for Guru Baba Nanak, in fact, wrote books on him and was very proud of his heritage. And my mother discovered Buddhism and became the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. Now, how that journey happened, what were the changes that made them happen, the experiences, all that's in the book. But my father saw no contradiction between his revolutionary activities and his religious activities. He said, it's for the benefit of other people. And what he brought in his philosophy was to do with the evolution of human beings to the best they can be. And my mother's Buddhism focused so much on compassion and kindness for others, as well as self-awareness through meditation. And I was a Buddhist monk also in Burma for 3 months as part of her journey, and also meditated and also benefited enormously. Both my parents gave me great strengths in my moments of crisis in life, as well as meditation gave me a grounding that I could always go back to in my darkest hours, all of which I've spoken about in my book.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. And the other thing that also struck me, and you've talked a lot about it already, because you've talked about, growing up in this home where you're surrounded by all this wonderful, this really inspiring talk about the birthing of a new nation. All of that is going on, and your parents are active participants in this entire making of the new nation. But the other thing
I must clarify. I must clarify. I actually was born just before independence. So
but it's
everything I'm telling you about my parents before that is something I heard.
It's part of your inheritance
heritage,
or
history.
DNA or whatever you want to call it.
Yes,
It seeps
absolutely,
into you.
absolutely.
And so also the early history of, say, independent India, which again is something that seems to also come through, in your own trajectory. So going to school, for example, with which you've mentioned, going to school with the two, Rajiv and Sanjay Gandhi, and that and various other people that were close friends of yours in those days, and then grew to become whoever they became later. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, your early days and this?
Well, Rajiv and Sanjay became friends of mine at the Montessori school that we went to on Haley Road near Connaught Circus in Delhi. And this lady that ran it, Elizabeth Goba, was a very creative woman, and she brought out the best of creativity in us. And we were just, kids fooling around, playing with toy trains, going around tracks, and learning to ride horses at Rashtrapati Bhavan, and just kids hanging around. I had no idea that they would um, shape India's destiny in such profound ways in the years to come. By the time I left Delhi, Rajiv had graduated from um, toy trains to thinking about being a pilot, and Sanjay had graduated from toy trains to thinking about making the people's car, and uh, Indira Gandhi had become prime minister, had been prime minister for a year and a half then. You know, when I first knew her, she was the official hostess at Teen Murti House, and Prime Minister Nehru was the prime minister, and he was the one we looked up to, etc. And when he caught us discussing a painting of a Ajanta Ellora a figure in the stately dining room, he laughed his head off because we were just trained to appreciate beauty by Auntie Goba, and he thought we were, looking at a nude woman. So.
Yeah.
So Indira Gandhi was just, Auntie Indu. We sat next to her in the Republic Day parades and saw these wonderful camels going by with soldiers mounted, all these tableaus from all over India, all the Bhangra dancers and Garba dancers, and the regiments marching would salute us as they passed us. So that was the kind of atmosphere we grew up in. I'll tell you one incident, though, from my book, that after Rajiv became prime minister, about 6 or 8 months later, I went to visit him in the prime minister's office, and he ushered me in, past all these waiting ministers, etc., shut the door firmly behind him, and he looked around and he held out his hands and he said, "Kahan phas gaye yaar?" The prime minister's office. "Kahan phas gaye yaar?" I said, "Rajiv, you're prime minister now. You better get serious." He said, "Don't get serious on me. I get that all day. People want me to get serious, So things like that. It was a very wonderful, warm relationship. And I was deeply saddened when they passed away both tragically. Since then, times have changed, the moods have changed, the politics of the country have changed, many things. But those memories remain. And then even after I left Auntie Goba's school, I came to Delhi Public School, which at that time was intense, because at that time, these were schools that were set up for the refugees that came from Pakistan, and there just weren't enough schools for them in Delhi. I mean, partition, people have to be reminded, was one of the bloodiest events in history. I mean, over 55 million people were affected. Over 2 million died in Punjab alone. Lives were shattered. It was a complete upheaval and amid bloodbaths. And yet, Punjab retained its spirit. Indian Punjab built itself up into the most powerful state in India. And these things are times that shouldn't be forgotten, nor the context of what happened in those times. So growing up in these schools that were really for refugees, my mother's work, I'd worked extensively with refugees in Kashmir, later with the Tibetan refugees. So one got a sense of humanity in its moments of greatest crisis. And that was all part of my growing up, all part of my growing up.
It's of course unusual, but also extremely, I mean, it's a privilege to have grown up like that and to have seen, so much of the change that came. But also to go back to what you mentioned about the article that you've done for the Tribune and your Punjabi Roots. Can we hear a little bit about that as well, about, about being a Bedi? And
I start the article by saying you can always take a Punjabi out of Punjab, but you can't take Punjab out of the Punjabi, because I have carried those roots within me wherever I have gone in the world. And my feeling has always been of one of great pride for my heritage and for being Punjabi. ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ अपने जिन्ने भरा भैन है ने जेड़े ये आर्टिकल पढ़नगे उन्हें बहुत ही मजा आएगा क्योंकि जो भी मैं लिखा है दिल तो लिखा है अपनी स्टोरी लिखी है plus the fact that during after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, when the most barbaric atrocious act happened in the history of independent India and 3006 were killed in Delhi, I was in California at the time, and that distressed me immensely. But what affected me even more, or as much, was the complete breakdown of relationships between Hindus and Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs. And this was a community that lived together in peace for 500 years. And the separatists were trying to fuel this divide. And I started a thing there called the Share Peace Fund, the Sikh Hindu Allied Relief Exchange, which said we have to get together to help because we are together. We've lived together. We are one. We are Punjabis. And we send contributions to the Punjab Chief Minister's Relief Fund. Unfortunately, the communities are once again at peace. But these things have always mattered to me. It didn't matter that I was far away. What was happening to Punjabis, to Sikhs, affected me. And the unity of Hindus and Sikhs is also important, as it is with the Muslims.
Yeah.
Because even when I went to Pakistan for the premiere of my film, Taj Mahal, I went to Lahore, even though it's a foreign country, but that Punjabiness that was there, I felt completely at home among Punjabis.
Mm.
Their religion was different, their country was different, but that sense of Punjabiyat was a uniting bond. So there is मेरी नानी ने मैंने पंजाबी सिखाई सी.
Yeah, I was coming to that.
She was slightly blind and had difficulty walking. So using that excuse, she would call me and say, "Putter akhbara pari, das ki ho raha hai duniya ch." And रोज जाके पंजाबी मैंने सुनाना पैंदा सी कि ये हो रहा वो हो रहा कर करा के मैं पंजाबी सीख ली. This was her way of teaching me my language, my roots, and my heritage. So the Punjab has always remained in me, even though I've spent most of my life outside Punjab.
What about the...
And I must say, in my book, I've also written about a very deep spiritual experience that I had at the Golden Temple when I went there with my wife, Parveen Dosanjh. And it was a very, very moving experience, which I've spoken about in my book. I just felt tears just streamed down my face. I felt I'd come home. It was that moving for me, that touching.
Yes, I hope you will come again and that you will visit us here as well.
I certainly hope to. I certainly hope to.
But what about the farmers' protests? Do you have an opinion on that? Because that's the other thing that has been gripping our imagination right from November onwards when it started.
I don't want to enter into a political discussion on that because the issue has become political. And I don't want to make this a political discussion because I'm really here to talk about my book. So when you get into politics, there's always divisive opinions on either side. And I don't want to enter that debate right now. Another time, another place, I'm happy to enter it. But for now, given the time we have, given the audience we have, given the occasion we have, let's stick to the book that I've written.
No, it was just that, Punjab always sort of, then you tend to go there. Yes. No, but then tell us about the films, actually. Tell us about Bollywood and when you entered and what you felt. Because to me, and I don't know, maybe to others as well, but to me, you always seemed like something of an outsider. You just were so different from what one saw as this, the normal person that one saw on the screen, especially in those days. Probably today it would be different. What do you think about that? I mean, your career there.
Well, let me say this. Firstly, I have many reasons to be very grateful to Bollywood. They got me recognized as a Bollywood actor. I got known all over India thanks to Bollywood. I have to be very grateful to them for that, because since I was known as a Bollywood actor, that's why I got picked for the Italian role, because my name came up. So I have to be extremely grateful for that launch that Bollywood gave me. I did have a problem with Bollywood, with singing and dancing. I fancied myself as a serious actor. I didn't want to do song and dance numbers. That again was something that's ironical, because I love watching song and dance numbers. I enjoy them enormously. I just wasn't a dancing type. So I knew that if I wanted to be a leading man, I'd either have to start singing and dancing, or I'd have to become a villain or whatever. But what cut short that whole process, I did a few films where I managed to do leading and supporting roles without singing and dancing. But the Italians came, and my career then began in Italy, and that went on to extraordinary superstardom, an experience which I can only describe as extraordinary. It's what actors dream of, and I was experiencing. So Bollywood also called me back to India, even when I was in Hollywood working with Tom Selleck in Hawaii, shooting Magnum PI. And suddenly Rakesh Roshan called me back to shoot Khoon Bari Mang with Rekha, and it became my biggest Bollywood hit. And then I went back again to do Bold and Beautiful, and I came back again. So these three industries, Bollywood, Europe, and Hollywood, have played an intertwining role in my life. But I was always clear in all the years I spent abroad that I would come back to India, because this is where I felt at home. This is the people I cared for the most. This is the people that I want to be among. Italy has given me more honor than any other country in the world. They've knighted me. They've given me the highest civilian award, which is extraordinary for an Indian actor. But this is home. This is home, and this is where I feel at home. So even though I'm here now, I continue to act abroad. But this journey of going from all the way from Delhi, Bombay, Rome, London, Hollywood, and then make my way back slowly is the graph of the book. But the graph can't tell you all the incredible dramas, emotions, scenes, conflicts, triumphs and tribulations that I faced, because it's impossible to tell it all in a simple gathering, in a simple way like this. But you felt it, you read it, you know what I'm talking about.
Definitely. I mean, that whole, your descriptions of Italy and then being Sandocan, and I mean, till as recently as yesterday, because I heard from somebody who had put up this very post about the conversation on their Facebook, and then some Italian friends saw it and said, oh, Sandocan, I mean, they recognized it yesterday. So,
Yes.
I mean, obviously, it's something that has stayed in their imagination. You have become a part of their cultural life. So tell us a little bit about, that whole episode, that whole, larger than life episode, actually.
You see, Emilio Salgari was one of the most popular adventure writers in Italy, and he lived around the middle of the 19th century, around the 1850s. He wrote these books of adventures in faraway places in South America, in Asia and the East, even in the North Pole and Canada, and all kinds of things. It was literature that everybody, from the great South American writers, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, Isabel Allende, all these people had read him in their childhood. So Sandokan was one of the characters he created, which became actually the most popular character. But there'd been films made on Sandokan which hadn't done very well. When I was picked to do this television series, somehow everything came together. A great director with a great vision, a great screenplay, great camera work, great music. He chose young pop musicians almost to do the soundtrack. And he picked this unknown actor from India to play this iconic role of Sandocan. I couldn't even read the original Sandocan books because there were no translations in those days, and I didn't speak Italian. So I pretty much had to sense my way through the role and depend on the guidance of the director. But I saw the parallels between Sandokan and my parent, because Sandokan also is an Asian who fights the British Empire after falling in love with an English girl, and they both join together. So I put the experience of my parents' lives into this character, and I played it with all my heart. And it resulted in spectacular gains and spectacular popularity across the whole of Europe. I've written about in my book of this incident where I went in the biggest department store in Spain, in Madrid, called El Corte Inglés. And it was a 10-story building. And I went there for a book signing. And after I got to the top to begin the signing, the manager said, "Please leave." I thought he was joking. He said, "No, if you don't leave, the building will collapse. People will die in their hundreds. It's not designed to hold so many people. There's fans on every floor.
Wow.
Please leave." So I had to leave. And how I left through that melee of fans, how I got out, what I faced on the street, how I had to jump across the tops of cars to get away. All this is the stuff of stardom, and it's the stuff of the kind of stories that make my book. Because to experience that kind of stardom is something really unique, really deeply satisfying, because that's what we work for. And yet it's full of its own problems and pitfalls, which are again examined in my book, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. If you get that kind of stardom, it creates its own problems. I got tremendously identified with that character. People couldn't cast me in their films, which is one of the reasons why I pushed on to Hollywood before I was able to return to Italy. And again, every actor in the world wants to go to Hollywood and see what he can do there. So that was again part of the reason. Part of my spirit says, "Janne hote dekhi jao ki hunda hai," you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But let's also talk a little bit about your, your tumultuous personal life and how that shaped you, because I think it also, it brought you joy, but it also brought immense pain, probably a lot of learning. So, your marriage with Pratima Bedi, for example, who also was a rebel and, iconic in that manner to all of us. I remember reading about her so much at that time. And then later, all that we read about with Parveen Babi and, films that were made, which were, vaguely on stories and so on. So all these very difficult times that you went through, to me, it also seemed like there was this constant search for, love in capital letters, because that's the kind of thing that you had seen, this kind of absolute, strong, committed relationship which your parents had, for example, which you also speak about and which was so apparent in the book, and which also I think Andrew Whitehead has written about somewhere.
right.
So what about all of these, the relationships that you went through, and then consequently later, of course, and then with your son, and, so all the harsher, the more difficult times that you faced?
I'll talk about that, but what I want to say is that all my life I've searched for a certain type of love, which I never got. Remarkable though these women were, enormous though the things we shared, even the love we shared at the time, but in the end, it didn't give me the love that I needed or wanted. And ironically, in the end, I found it with my wife, Parveen Dosanjh, who's a Punjabi girl. So I've found my happiness with a Punjabi girl who gives me the kind of, who empowers me, gives me love, nurtures me, and gives me the feeling of completion that I seek as a man. This is not to say that I didn't deeply love Prathama and deeply love Parveen, or that I didn't love my other wives. It's just that there is a sense of homecoming that I felt when I married Parveen. But let me get back to Prathama. Prathama and I were children of the 60s. We were the rebels. We enjoyed being the rebels. We enjoyed shocking people. We enjoyed making headlines in magazines saying they lived together, which was scandalous at the time. And of course, even today, anyone living in an open marriage would be thought of as scandalous. But the real story is, how does a couple, a young couple happily married, go through a process where in the end, an open marriage is the only way to save that marriage? That's something you have to understand through what I've explained and described in the book. When that didn't work, I moved on to my next relationship, which was with Parveen Babi. That had immense joys and yet immense problems of its own, all of which I have explained and explored, because there were professional issues, there were medical issues, there were mental health issues, and this was happening at the time of my greatest professional glory. So this other track of the personal relationship running while your professional relationship is going at another level created this strange dichotomy for me, and strange resentments on my side and her side, all of which is, I believe, the stuff of great drama, which is in my book.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of reaching the end of my time, because we do want to have some audience questions. But so I'll just go to the last question, which is basically looking at the future and where are you headed now? Are you writing more? Is there more acting? What are you looking forward to, Mr. Baby?
Well, acting is what I do. That's my bread and butter. That's my identity. And I'm sure there will always be other projects coming, whether for film or the OTT platforms or television or theater, whatever form it takes, I don't know. I'm still excited by the thought of doing roles that suit me anywhere in the world. So that'll continue. But I've enjoyed the process of writing so enormously that I certainly hope to keep writing. But right now, what I'm working very hard on is trying to sell a book of a debut author in the middle of a raging pandemic. And that's hard work. It's hard work. The people are focused on other things, and as they move beyond, I'm amazed by how many people come to say, "Where can I get your book?" I say, "Well, I know the bookstores are closed, but there's Amazon, there's Flipkart, there's places you can go online and order them, and hopefully the bookstores will open soon, because the bookstore is also something that's very much part of the life of a community, and that will continue. There's nothing like the smell of books in a bookstore. But if you can't get there, there's always the online world." So getting that message across, talking to you, talking to the wonderful people at Majha House, talking to my Punjabi brethren, these are the joys of promoting your book. But it is a lot of work when you have to speak to groups all over the country to tell your story and try and persuade them to buy your book, because every writer wants his book read. I can't assume that just because I'm a film star, people want to read my book. In fact, in some cases, they say, "Oh, ki likhega yaar, apni burai thodi karega." You know, everyone thinks that, the people who told me, they'll think, "Oh, it's just a cut and paste of Stardust interviews." It's not. It's a life that's lived.
And actually, there's
in
a
the
lot
raw,
missing. There's a lot missing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there should be more. I mean, there should be a follow-on. But
hopefully
I have
there
this
will
really
be, because there are
interesting.
other stories I have to tell that were not part of those
Definitely
stories.
think so. Yes. Because
But
I mean,
I will only write those if enough people are interested in these stories. you know. But so far, I've been blessed by the reviews I've got. I can't complain. I've really received the most extraordinary reviews that a debut author could hope to have, and I'm most grateful for them.
I also have a lot of friends who've joined us from Sikkim, actually, from Gangtok, a whole bunch
How
of
wonderful!
people.
How
And
wonderful!
there's a friend, Guru T. Ladakhi, who says that Mamila was a frequent visitor in our house in Gangtok. I think at the Ladakh
That's right.
house. Yes.
That's right. My
And
mother was. She was called Mamila. They all know her as Mamila because
oh,
she
yeah.
was
So
like
that's why he
a
refers
mother
to
to a generation of Tibetan refugees because she looked after them in the Tibetan refugee camps. And after she became the highest nun, she lived with His Holiness in the monastery of His Holiness Karmapa in Rumtek, which is just 20 miles from Gangtok. And I went often to Rumtek to see her and knew the old royal family of the Chogyal of Sikkim very well, and his wife, Hope Cook. In fact, he was the man that gave me 20,000 rupees to see me through my first year of college. And after that, I managed on my own. But he was the kindest man in the world in giving me that help in my first year in college. So
in
I have
fact,
a
if
lot of
Guru is
respect for
here, you should.
Sikkim.
I mean, if Guru is here, if you're here, Guru, maybe you'd like to, maybe we
Just
can
a
speak
moment.
to you and
Just a
you'd like
moment,
to ask
Preeti.
something.
Yeah, just a moment. I'm just, yeah. It's Guru T. Yeah.
Guru T. Ladakhi, yes.
Yeah. Please, I have, Guru, I have requested you to unmute yourself.
Hi, Kabirji. I remember your mother because I had come once from boarding school and she was there at the house. And my father had built a small cottage for her in Rumtek so that she could be with His Holiness.
Oh, right. Right.
I'm his son.
How wonderful. How wonderful.
And I think somebody told us that you will be visiting us. I mean, I was not at home because I was in boarding school, but my parents were saying that you'll be also coming. But I think ultimately your brother came, Ranga came to visit us at home.
Right.
But it was a wonderful thing. And I have only one memory of your mom, Mamila, because I had gone and she was in our prayer room and she had a poster of you in, Sandocan, as Sandocan.
Wonderful.
And she
I
told
didn't
me,
know that.
and I was at probably 8 years old or something. And she said, he is my son. I looked at this tall, handsome, bearded man. And I looked at Anila. I said, Anila had a son, So that was just a memory I have because I was very young. I was just 8 years old, I think. And she was very proudly showing me the poster and saying, he's my son, And so that's the only memory I have of her right now. But I think my parents have more memory.
Thank you for that, Guru. One of the greatest satisfactions a son can have is that his parents are alive to see his greatest successes. And I had that when I got my successes in Italy and Europe and later the Bond film and Bold and Beautiful in America. They were alive to see, at least the Italian part, my mother was alive. And she saw the glory that I had achieved, how I'd made India proud. And every son wants his mother and father to see that moment. And I was blessed to have them.
That's a blessing.
We also have a number of ex-Stephanians here. And Sandeep Dial is there and Mandeep Soin is there. And Mandeep is asking, how about a biopic being made on you?
Well, I'm sure it'll find a cinematic form somewhere, somehow. I haven't written it in that particular form because my structure is different, but I'm sure once people like the overall story, that great screenplay writers will extrapolate those stories into a great screenplay. I'll leave that to them. But certainly it's one hell of a story, and I hope it gets seen and made.
Yeah.
There are a couple of others. Babette from Berlin, who says, Kabir ji, what international actor would you like to work with?
Oh, lots of international actors. I don't want to get into names. Babette is a very special person. She follows me on Twitter. We often exchange messages. She's done some wonderful stories on Sandocan, what happened after the series finished. So Babette is certainly a very special friend of mine in terms of she follows me and I respond to her because she's a very sincere and sensitive person. So, but I don't know which actors I'd like to work with. I mean, just name them. They're all great. You know, I'd love to work with Anthony Hopkins. I'd love to work with Robert De Niro. I'd love to work with Sean Penn. I'd love to work with Brad Pitt. I'd love to work with any of the great actors around. It's a special joy working with any good actors in any good films, in any good roles. So there's no single one that I think I must work with him. I'm open to all because there are so many wonderful, wonderful talents around.
A lot of people are complaining about not being able to get the book yet. Some people
Why can't they get the book?
Yeah,
Can't
I
they
don't
just
know.
order
I
it
think,
from
yeah,
order it
sorry.
from Amazon or Flipkart? What is the problem?
No, PTG, let me share. Like Kabirji was saying that since the bookstores are closed, right now during the session, I have ordered 5 copies and none for me.
Thank you so much.
I'll be working as a messenger. I'll be sending all the 5 books to the neighboring country. And during the session, I got the request from my 5 participants of the session that you arrange the books and send it across to Pakistan so that we can get the books and we can read.
How wonderful.
Wonderful.
How wonderful.
Okay, there's also
Thank you for that,
Anita.
Arvinderji. Thank you so much.
Mandeep's wife, Anita, is saying, I read the book and particularly enjoyed the history and historical facts that Kabir wrote about.
Right, that's lovely. That's lovely. I'll be speaking to Mandeep as well at a session I'm going to be having with the Stephanians later in the month.
Right.
So we'll have a full-fledged discussion with the Stephanians out there. But I'm so delighted to be able to speak to the Majha House group.
Seeing Mandeep here after years and years anyway. Yeah. Hi. Wonderful. Yeah. This is quite amazing.
I have a question. Can
Please,
I ask?
Yes, yes.
Kabir, I want to know, मैंने एक बार पूजा बेदी को सुना था that Baba Bedi was a healer. You haven't talked about that much in your book. Tell us more about that.
No, I have talked about it. I have talked about his transition from being a freedom fighter to developing all these incredible psychic abilities.
That part.
I even talked about this government servant who came to his wife, couldn't conceive, and how he told her to just put a rose in her hair every day for 6 months, and she conceived. But apart from that, I've talked about the incredible work he did in Italy and the philosophy that he shaped, which was concerned with not just healing, that is a gift he had. His interest was in empowering people to become the best they can be, using all their creative energies, all their psychic energies, and awakening those in ways that give them new energies and new leases in life. So that I have talked about in my book. And of course, I couldn't talk about it in all the depth I wanted because ultimately, I was, just telling 3 books have been written on my mother alone. So I was just writing 1 chapter on my parents. So there's a limit to how much I could explain. But I did, I believe, capture the essence of what he taught, what he preached, how many people he healed in body, mind, and soul.
Okay, body, mind, and soul. Thank you.
And Preeti, if you allow me, may I ask Kabir ji, can you, Dere Babe Nanak diyan kuch gallan je ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਨੇੜੇ ਹੋਣ ਦਿਲ ਦੇ? Because I have been to that area, I've worked in that area for a good number of years, even for the Kartarpur project also I've worked. So I really wish क्योंकि सारे ਜਿਹੜੇ viewers ने participants ने they are from the across the world.
Right, right. But Dera Baba Nanak is really a place that is highly symbolic to me. I've only been there twice in my childhood, but the fact that my mother became famous across the whole of Punjab for the satyagraha that she did there, and the fact that our family's roots are all there, and both my father Baba Bedi and his brother T.D. Bedi were big figures in Dera at the time. And we were so fortunate that at the time of partition, Dera Baba Nanak remained in India by a whisker. Literally, the bund that separates Pakistan from India is just literally a few hundred yards away from Dera. And unfortunately, Kartarpur Sahib was not given to India, which it should have been given, rightly. And that tragedy didn't happen to Dera. So we were, as a family, were very thankful for that. And for me, it has been a place of great symbolic importance. I have no property there. I have no known living relatives there that I know of. But because also what happened was that after the death of her husband, my grandmother, Mata Pulkor, took them to live in Kapurthala because her grandfather used to be the Diwan, effectively the Prime Minister of Kapurthala under the Maharaja of Kapurthala. So a lot of the childhood of my father was spent actually in Kapurthala rather than Dera Baba Nanak. But that was the village that he came from. So Dera has had a special place in my life. Kapurthala has had a very special place in my life. As has the whole of Punjab. The feeling of being Punjabi and carrying Punjab inside me has always stayed with me, which is why all the problems that happened in '84 affected me so deeply, and which is why I started the peace initiative between Hindus and Sikhs. Punjab is a very special place and a very special people, and I'm extremely proud of my Punjabi roots. In fact, my article in the Tribune tomorrow is called "My Punjabi Roots."
And sir, I'm not correcting you, but I'm just sharing that you don't have close relatives over there. We all are your relatives, and we all are yours, and we all belong to the land, the Majha region. And
thank you so much.
I would like to mention Preeti ji. We all are indebted to Kabir ji for bringing such a beautiful book. And his father has written the sole biography of the founder of the Lahore. And I think probably no one else has written about Sir Gangaram.
Sir Gangaram, right. He wrote a beautiful book on Sir Gangaram.
Beautiful biography on Sir Gangaram.
Not many people know that. It's very special that you do. Very special that you do.
I think we can do one last question. Sanjay has been messaging. He has a question. So Sanjay, if you would...
Sure, Sanjay.
I'll just unmute Sanjay. Just a moment. Sanjay, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, I can't do anything to the video, but Ms. Vedi, thank you for this wonderful, it's a tour de force. And,
thank you so much.
Just listening to you and what you said about, going to the Golden Temple and how moved you were just by going there and the homecoming. I think all of us even those of us who are not Sikhs, who've been there, are moved by the power of that place. And I just wondered, because you come from a very, very distinguished family, is there a special and favorite passage from the Granth Sahib which you have, and would you read it or recite it?
I wouldn't be able to read it or recite it right now. The Granth Sahib has been a very sacred book, and we revere it. But I am not conversant in Gurmukhi, so I have not read the Granth Sahib in the original. but it is truly one of the most inspiring books, because the message of Guru Baba Nanak, of the one from which everything comes, is such an all-embracing universal truth, and the importance of service to others, which is the hallmark of Sikhism, is such a message for humanity that if we just understand these two fundamental truths, the whole world would be a much better place.
Thank you for your transparency and very, very, deep honesty. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanjay.
I think Mandy's also said we'd love to know more about Adam and Pooja and their connection to the wonderful grandparents. Can't wait to read the book on Freda Bedi. So I think that we've got lots of people excited about the books.
That's right. I mean, the 3 books written on my mother, said one by Andrew Whitehead, who's a reporter for the BBC. There's Vicky McKenzie. There's Norma Levine, all write about her from different perspectives. Andrew more from the historical perspective and a really well-documented thing. Vicky more from the Buddhist perspective. Norma Levine also from Buddhist, but also very emotional account of her life. And now I'm writing the story of my parents in a chapter that sums up the essence of their lives with the most poignant moments that shaped their lives. And I hope I've done my bit towards remembering them too.
So if we don't have any more questions, then of course, Nishi is asking, what has been your guiding principle of life? Maybe we can end with that one then.
Firstly, I'd say pushing the envelope, not accepting status quo, always wanting to push beyond, move beyond Delhi, move beyond advertising, move beyond Bollywood, move beyond Italy. Keep pushing the envelope. See how far you can go and how far you can take that journey and how interesting you can make it. And secondly, is my abiding belief that the best is yet to come.
That's true. That's true.
Jasmeet, can I please ask you now to do the thank yous and the conclusion?
Yeah. So this is a lovely book, and everybody needs to go through that. Everybody needs to buy it, because the reading is very intense, and actually what you've talked is making us more curious. It should make all our viewers more curious as to what is inside this book. And it was lovely listening to you, Kabir.
Thank you, Jasmeet.
जो नहीं लास्ट वाला पार्ट जरा पंजाबी में बोल के सुनाना हमें कि आपको हमारे साथ रह के बड़ा मजा आया बात करके.
ऐसे आके वाकई बड़ा सुकून मिला, बड़ी तसल्ली मिली कि अपने बहन और पुराना पंजाबी गल कर सकिया ते नाले अपने किताब दे बारे सबनू समझा सकिया कि मैं की लिखिया, किद्दां लिखिया, क्यों लिखिया, ये सब समझाना बहुत जरूरी है. और मैनू इन्नी सैटिस्फैक्शन हुई है कि मैनू इन्ने चंगे बंदे मिले ने जेड़े कि मेरी गल समझ सकते ने, होपफुली मेरी किताब खरीद ही सकते ने.
That's very right. And thank you so much to all the viewers who've been with us and enjoyed listening to you, and to the team, Majha House, and special thanks to you, Kabir. You gave us a wonderful evening.
And thank you, Preeti, for your wonderful questions.
Yeah.
And thank you for your welcome, Jasmeet.
I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope you will visit at some point.
Yeah. I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will.
Since he has relatives now in Amritsar, close to Dera Baba Nanak, and
you have to come back.
He cannot say.
And Arvinder ji, tell ka bhi bata dijiye, please. Tomorrow's program.
दोस्तों, माझा हाउस का एक चैप्टर ऑफशूट है साझा पंजाब, जिदे च ਅਸੀਂ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ, ਈਸਟਰਨ ਐਂਡ ਵੈਸਟਰਨ ਪੰਜਾਬ, ਦ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਐਂਡ ਦ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ. ਇਕਸਾਰਤਾ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤਹਿਜ਼ੀਬ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਔਰ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਕਾਫਤ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ. ਅੱਜ ਇਸੇ ਕੜੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ We will be having a session tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pakistan time and 6:30 Indian time. We'll be joining at 6:20 p.m. as we joined today. And it'll be a talk between three legends, a journey home to Lehda, Punjab. Professor Taranjeet Singh Batalia from Batalia, he would join us from US, Mazhar Abbas and Khizr Jawad. So दोस्तों कल इंतजार रहेगा ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਦੀ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾਉਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਦਾ ਪੈਗਾਮ ਇਸ ਪੂਰੀ ਕਾਇਨਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਕਬੀਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੰਡਿਆ ਤੇ ਕੱਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸੇ ਪਿਆਰ ਨੂੰ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੇ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਬੈਨਰ ਥੱਲੇ ਕੱਲ ਫਿਰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਮਿਲਾਂਗੇ ਸ਼ਾਮ 6:20 ਤੇ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੇ 5:50 ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਸਟੈਂਡਰਡ ਟਾਈਮ। Amazon ਜੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ 10 ਬੁੱਕਸ ਅਲਾਉ ਕਰਦਾ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ 10 ਆਰਡਰ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨੇ 5 ਤੇ ਰੋਕ ਦਿੱਤਾ। 5 ਮੈਂ ਅੱਜ ਆਰਡਰ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਕੱਲ ਆਰਡਰ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ।
Okay, ji. Thank you.
God bless and thank you so very much. It was indeed
Badi mehrbani.
It was indeed
Bada maza aaya. Thank you so much for your love and understanding.
Thanks to Preeti for bringing such a beautiful soul to amongst all of us on the platform Majha House.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Preeti. Thank you, Jasmeet.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.